Hi everyone, it's Jordan Bateman here with another edition of the BC Poly Hot Stove. I'm the Vice President of Communications for the Independent Contractors and Businesses Association, live in Burnaby, British Columbia, Canada, terminus of the Trans Mountain Pipeline. Joined as always by...
My name is Maclean K. I'm the editor-in-chief of the Orca from Victoria, British Columbia, Canada, terminus of many a political career.
Fair enough. Yeah, we're seeing a lot of that right now. And I know what you're thinking out there. You're thinking, what on earth are these guys going to talk about? There hasn't been a legislative session in months. It's a week before the throne speech, but it's not like the NDP, are going to be leaking stuff on what they plan to talk about. But don't worry, BC politics, there's always something to talk about. First of all, I just want to give a shout out to the folks at CanadaAction.ca. They were up at the Natural Resources Forum in Prince George last week. But almost 1,000 people there this year, Maclean. Like a huge event.
That's what I hear, yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, this is something that was well attended under the previous BC Liberal government, and it's good to see that under an NDP government, which one could argue is less friendly to natural resource development, they are still making sure that their voices are getting heard.
Yeah, exactly. It was actually started by Mike Morris's office, the Prince George MLA. And, to the NDP's credit, they continue to send ministers there and deputy ministers for these important events. So it does show you how it's kind of grown past, what I probably at the very beginning seemed like a partisan event, even though it wasn't. But, started by an MLA's office. Now it's kind of grown beyond that. But the folks at CanadaAction.ca sent me this fantastic LNG T-shirt, asked me to wear it on BC Poly Hot Stove. And, of course, free stuff. Of course I'm going to wear it on BC Poly Hot Stove. Why wouldn't I?
It's a good-looking shirt.
All right, this is good stuff. So, front burner issue, Maclean, it's throne speech time. Somewhere in that building, there is some poor schmuck who used to be you, typing away on a throne speech and being bossed around, told to make it shorter, told to make it more inspiring. But could you also shoehorn in?
Yes.
Could you also shoehorn in 12 more policy items?
Well, that's it exactly. Make it shorter, but don't cut anything important, and make sure you include these extra 5 things that we just thought of yesterday. So I don't know who is writing the throne speech for the NDP, but whoever you are, I sympathize with you deeply. I have been there on several occasions. It's not a lot of fun. It's not very rewarding. And the thing is that the more sort of surprises and hints you put in the throne speech, the less you have to announce yourself and get credit for with your ministers and MLAs down the road. So, that was a conscious decision Christy Clark's government did, where they would put not as much in the throne speech in terms of, and I'm talking about terms of concrete policy. We're going to do this X, Y, Z. It'd be more sort of general. Here are our aspirational goals, and here's a vague idea of how we're going to get there. The NDP have been a little more concrete, but here's the thing. We were just talking about this morning up here in the press gallery in Victoria. Nobody has any inkling what's going to be in this one. The NDP have not shared any hints. They haven't floated anything. They haven't, at least to my knowledge. And so, that's not a statement on anything. Often they'll sort of give the press a sort of a little hint if there's something big to come down the pipe that they can at least start thinking about in terms of stories on Monday. But this time, no, it's been pretty quiet. So I honestly have no idea what's coming next week.
Yeah, you're right. There has not been, usually you get that little balloon floated here or there, or, the premier will say something like, watch out for this theme. But, yeah, you're right. There really has not been any of that. That is interesting. I do wonder if the Nanaimo by-election, consuming so much of government's time and attention, might have, kind of quashed the ability to do that. Throne speech is such an interesting thing because, it starts off with the usual, remembrances of prominent British Columbians who have passed away since the last time the House sat, which I imagine there are, mad, researchers, throughout the building going, geez, we can't forget anyone important here, and, scribbling down names. And
it is so hard. And then there are situations that I have directed people to do where we have a name of somebody we know we have to include, but we can't be certain how to pronounce it. So they've actually had to call his or her family, and which isn't a fun call to make if you're a young staffer and you think you're going to get into politics. And no, unfortunately today we need you to get in touch with a grieving widow.
Yeah, not great.
It's It's not the tribute to the beginning of the throne speech. A shocking amount of time goes into that, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, it is just a paragraph at the beginning, but it is
Yeah.
an honor to be remembered in the House. And obviously every word spoken in the House is recorded forever on Hansard. So that's why it's an important thing to do. So yeah, there will always be someone who's missed out or forgotten, but generally both governments of all stripes get it right. So there's that component. Then there is the aspirational component, and then of course there is if there is going to be something concrete rolled out. Although you talk about we haven't heard anything about throne speech. We haven't heard anything about the budget yet either, except that
That's also true. Yeah.
it will be balanced apparently. PTT will be way down, property transfer tax. But this time last year they were floating different, kind of getting people ready for the big tax increases. Not all of them were mentioned. Employer health tax, for example, was a complete surprise on budget day, but they were at least floating some tax increases. Carol James has kind of eaten up all that tax from going into budget.
Yeah, I mean, there's two reasons to float something like a new tax, just as an example, to media. One is if you think it's good and you're wanting them to, that's the story you're going to write on Monday. It's good for them to be sort of looking for it when they come to see either the throne or the budget. The other reason is if it's bad and you're kind of wanting to put a preliminary spin on it. Hey, you guys, you're going to see this, and this is why we're doing it, and this is what it's going to be eventually. But again, we've seen neither of those things.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. I remember one year when I was with the Taxpayers Federation, we were working very hard on MSP, and Christy Clark came out and said, this is the year we're going to address this MSP. It's going to be fantastic. I remember getting into lockup early. I was first or second person into lockup. I wanted to see this because this was a big push for the Taxpayers Federation, the work I'd been doing. And I flipped through the document, and there was this press release: kids eat free, essentially. MSP kids are now MSP free. And I sat down and did the math based on it and realized that I was actually going to end up paying more with my kids being free on MSP than I did before. My payment went up. I have 3 kids, so if kids are eating free, I was certainly paying more for it, and that went over like a lead balloon so badly, in fact, that the next year Clark finally got it right and cut the thing in half, and the rest is history. But you float those expectations, you do have to meet them, which may be why.
Yeah.
And look, they're in the second year of their mandate. It's pretty clear now that this thing's going to go all the way to an election in 2021. There's really no rush. It doesn't seem like the Greens are going to get themselves off the mat at any point and push back on Horgan at all. And they may want an election even less than the NDP want an election. So with that in mind, this might be kind of the placeholder budget.
Yeah, well, and you mentioned the Greens. I had opportunity to chat with Andrew Weaver last week about this very thing.
Oh, how's the good doctor? How is the doctor?
Well, he took. There are a lot of people suggesting that the results in Nanaimo are disastrous for him, and let's be honest, they weren't good. But he is of the opinion that the NDP are riding about as high in the polls as they're ever going to do, because there is, the sting of the property tax and the employer's health tax is still just around the corner, and so they wouldn't mind if Andrew Weaver and his Green caucus decided to force an election. In his words, it wouldn't be very progressive of the NDP for themselves to force an election in search of a majority, but I mean, if they were pushed, they would come to the people of British Columbia and ask for a renewed mandate. And so he's not going to do that. He's not going to give them what they want.
Isn't that convenient?
Yeah, well, it's if they have outsmarted him into supporting them at every turn, they are very smart indeed. And but we'll see. I mean, let's be fair to the good doctor, because he's not wrong. I believe the NDP would do think that probably their chances are better now than they will be 2 years from now, because who knows what's going to happen. And that I also believe him that all things being equal, it looks better on them if Weaver forces an election rather than Horgan just saying, you know what, polls look good, let's go to the polls.
Yeah.
So, I mean, he's not wrong on 2 of his assumptions. However, I don't know that his conclusion is necessarily the one I would go with.
Yeah, I think George and Jody on Unspun would have fun unspinning this, because really it is kind of covering over the fact that it's the Green Party who's the least ready of all 3 parties for an election, the one with the most chance of losing seats. It's a nice spin to put on it, but I'm not sure it actually passes the old sniff test there. But Whatever you're telling yourself these days, Doc. I mean, it's not great times for the Green Party in BC, given how high they were just 18 months ago. So we will.
It'll be interesting to see how well they do in the federal election. Now, obviously, traditionally, they have only ever won one seat, and in Saanich North in the Islands. But they are apparently quietly optimistic for a handful more seats, even if just on Vancouver Island. But again, we shall see.
I think this session, though, is incredibly important. This session may be the most important to the Greens, more important to the NDP, even though they're governing, and more important to the Liberals, even though they're trying to build on some success here. They have got to come in and ask tough questions. And, in question period, they can't be so far off the topic of the day, right? The Liberals would come in and ask about, spend a day on PLAs, project labor agreements, and union monopolies. And then, the Greens would ask, a question on, some minute aspect of climate change that, was never going to get any coverage because it didn't fit into the theme of the day. The Greens need to come in and aggressively question the government if they're really going to paint themselves as an opposition party, as the honest broker who can, deal with both sides. They need to come in and be tough in question period. They need to be on topic in question period. And God forbid, Maclean, I'm even going to suggest they need to maybe explore some of the same issues that the Liberals are exploring in question period, but with better angles and less baggage from the past. They can ask things that the Liberals just can't on ICBC, for example. And if the Greens don't ask it about ICBC, who really will?
Well, I think that there is some, actually, this will surprise you, but some broad agreement from the Green minds with you on this, and that they do need to differentiate themselves more. The Greens will concede that they have not done a good job explaining to the people of BC what work they've done behind the scenes. They will privately point to things that have not happened as evidence of things that they're sort of blunting the impact of the NDP. And that's great. And even if it's true, again, how do you prove a negative, and how do you show people that it's worth voting for you? So I think you will see some more pointed questions, even on issues that we won't agree with them on. They might be, why are you still playing footsie with more LNG projects when we've made it clear to you we'll only support the one? Again, you and I will disagree with that, but at least it's an issue that the Greens would be consistent on. Yeah. So I think you will see some of that, but how blunt and how pointed and how aggressive, that remains to be seen.
Yeah, no, I agree. You think? What do you think the first topic is of the first question period? Spec tax?
I do. I think it's going to be the Liberals had some success with the story. I think it was Joan Isaacs. You'll correct me.
Yes.
Yeah. It's just a sad story, really. It's a widow who's being forced to jump through hoops to prove that her husband isn't a speculator. He is, in fact, deceased.
Yes.
And it's kind of
for a home they've lived in for decades. She's 78. Yeah. She couldn't get a straight answer from anyone. She's being given the runaround on the phone. Even to at one point she was told by someone to call the federal government.
It's exactly what the pessimist said might happen, at least in some cases, and it's just sad. It's bureaucracy run amok. It's bad policy. It's kind of everything all together at once, and it's going to be very difficult for Carol James, who I don't think is a cold-hearted person, to say, there was always going to be some collateral damage.
Yeah.
What do you say other than, our people screwed that one up, or whoever she spoke to, this widow, should have done a much better job? That's the best answer here. Yeah. The person was given bad advice and we're going to fix it. Will the NDP do that? No. They'll probably blunt it and say they're in the middle of a housing crisis and this was all necessary. And even if you agree with that, that doesn't help this widow.
Yeah, spec tax is my front burner issue right now. And, there's that story. There was a story from the mayor of Belcarra, which is a tiny village in the Lower Mainland up on Burrard Inlet. And it's, about 600 people, and about half the properties there are essentially recreational properties. But because it's in the Lower Mainland, they're being forced to pay the speculation tax. And, the house itself, for example, a number of them have no sewer. Well, almost none of them have sewer. No sewer, no water connections, nothing like that. No insulation because they're meant for summer. And they're being told, you've got to you've got to pay the speculation tax on this essentially vacation property. The problem is, the land, the house itself is worth $20,000, but the land, of course, is waterfront in Burrard Inlet. It's worth millions. So, you've got these people who have had these properties in their family for 60, 70, 80 years. They are not speculators. They're not looking to flip this. They're not looking to make gobs of money. It's
Nor
a family
can they
company.
suddenly absorb a massive property tax increase.
Oh, exactly. Yeah, they're just normal middle-class folks who happen to have this, nice property that, their, grandma and grandpa left to them. And,
and even if the province was suddenly to nationalize every single one of those homes, it doesn't do a thing for the housing affordability crisis.
No, exactly. And I forget which dummy NDP minister they trotted out. It wasn't Carol James on this particular story. But the rationale was, well, you could work with the renters to upgrade the property and have them rent it out. The problem with that is, there's no insulation. You actually can't do that. And this is not what this tax was meant to do. And these aren't, foreign investors. Like I said, they're British Columbians who, this property's been in their family for decades. But Belcarra thinks as many as, half the properties might be subject to this tax. The Belcarra mayor has begged to get out of it. If I were the BC Liberals, I'd be bringing, that guy across for the opening week and have him doing the media tour and have him showing pictures and explaining stories as best he can. And asking questions.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but Belcarra, I believe, is in Port Moody Coquitlam, which is now an NDP riding, but one that they're going to have a tough time hanging on to. The MLA there, Rick Glumick, is not, he has been among the least visible NDP MLAs in this government.
Wow. Even the name, I'm like, Rick Glumick. I'm like, forgot about that guy. But yes, you're exactly right. So there's the Belcarra issue, there's the widow issue. There's also the issue I wrote about in New York this week, and the Vancouver province, not to scoop them, are running the piece on Monday.
Very good piece.
Yeah, on collecting email addresses, and this was a conversation I was having with a political hack friend of mine, and we were talking about doing the speculation tax form, and I was whining and complaining about how hard it was for me to find information about properties that sell, because my wife and I are moving on February 27th. Our family's moving, and do we have a file for our house if we're not living there, or do we file for the new house? What happens if the lady who owns the new house doesn't file? How this all works. Buried deep within the recesses of the government website, by the way, is if you pay property transfer tax on a property in that year, you are automatically exempt from the spec tax. However, I'm not sure if that's actually true, because these guys don't seem to be cross-referencing anything. So I fully expect to get a spec tax bill for this new property at some time in later this year and have to scream and yell about it. But anyways.
And we still have not received our letters, neither my wife nor I. So I guess, boy.
Dirty speculators.
We have some calls to make.
You dirty speculators, you're going to have to pay big time. So, I was complaining about that. He was saying, he was laughing, saying we had another friend who was complaining about putting in your social insurance number, but that didn't really bother me because it's a government issued number, what do I care? But he talked about the emails. And then we started talking about what you could do with a database of 1.6 million email addresses of every homeowner in the key swing areas of the province. The Lower Mainland is the swing area, and with all due respect to the rest of the province, how the Lower Mainland votes will determine who the next government is. There's just so many ridings in the Lower Mainland. And now the NDP have this database of every property owner in the area. So they could actually create. And, funnily enough, you had the privacy commissioner coming out with a talk about how political parties use this information. They can come out with this, different kind of targeted ads on Facebook, on Instagram, because you use your email address to sign into that. And these, social media platforms are very sophisticated. They know, if you're this guy, if you're using this email on Twitter, it's probably on Facebook, and all those different things that we see with typical advertising. They can start, soft peddling some ads to homeowners. It really is, it suddenly occurred to me that this is as much a data collection exercise, an email collection exercise, as anything else, because otherwise, why would you bother spending the money to send out 1.5 million letters to try to catch 30,000 people?
And you have the extra credibility of those ads coming from the government. As opposed to the BC NDP, and there might be a little more skepticism for any ad that you see coming from any political party. But if the government is sending you a thing saying, "Hey, look at all these great things we're doing," you might be a little more inclined to go, "Oh, well, hey, yeah, look at that." There's a reason the NDP have hired a number of digital strategists who have done campaigns for organizations like Lead Now, and it's because these things are effective, and to be frank, they've been good at them. Yeah. There's a reason they're doing this.
And the hypocrisy of not just this government, every government. In opposition, they scream and yell about government advertising is too much, it's too unfair, and then they get into power and forget that they ever said anything and do exactly the same or worse than the group before them. And the Clark Liberals were worse than the Campbell Liberals, who were worse than the NDP of the '90s, who were worse. And now you have John Horgan's crew, Adrian Dix and John Horgan, Carol James, who complained about this for years. Are they taking any steps to fix it? No. It's like FOI. They complained about it when they're in opposition and then hide behind it when they're in government. It's disgusting, and it's a criticism of every single stripe of government who get into there, that they don't actually stand up for what's right at the right moment. So there you go. That's my rant. That's my rant.
Here.
That is the rant. All right, back burner issue. So Maclean, Daryl Plekas, and Mr. Mullen, Alan Mullen, sitting down in a weirdly set up interview for CTV last night. They seem so close together. I don't understand. They put them up they're all huddled there, and Daryl kind of slouched over.
They are very closely associated with each other. There's no question about that.
Yeah. And now we're being promised criminal charges. There will be criminal charges, says the Speaker of the House of British Columbia.
I mean, I don't know what to say. If he is aware of criminal charges that are forthcoming, then it is not his purview to make said criminal charges. And I don't doubt that he is talking with the RCMP on a somewhat regular basis. I do question whether, if there were criminal charges coming, if they would tell him that, because that would, by definition, be compromising the investigation. If the people being investigated, and we all know who they are being told in advance that they're going to be charged by a third party, you just don't need to be a legal expert to realize that this is risky and questionable at best. I don't understand.
And special prosecutors have been appointed to oversee all this, specifically to keep dummy politicians out of it.
So it's unfortunate. Plekas is finally sort of filling the vacuum of intense public interest in this, but he's done so at a very late stage in the game, when one would presume the special prosecutors and the police investigation, their investigations are well underway. So it's difficult to see why he would say that, other than, it's entirely possible that he knows things that we don't, and time will tell. We also have yesterday the two officials who are on administrative leave, not suspended technically. Craig James and Gary Lenz filed their response to the Plekas report. They were given an extension. Now, we can't see it. Because the response was given to LAMC, the Legislative Assembly Management Committee, and they have to agree to make it public. Now, James and Lenz have said they want to make it public, but even if it's just a rubber stamp from the committee, and it probably will be, they have to meet and agree to make it public, which hopefully will happen next week.
Yeah, so this story definitely continues. I understand that you sat down with the great man, Alan Mullen, the almost Sergeant of Arms.
I am working on that piece. I had a good 35 minutes with Mr. Mullen. We talked about everything from
where was the interview held? I got some questions here. Where was the interview held?
It was in his office, downstairs.
In the Speaker's office.
Yes.
What kind of scotch did he give you to drink?
He made me a coffee. We both had a coffee.
Was it a Keurig? Was it a Keurig or a drip?
It was a Keurig. We both enjoyed a
better
Keurig
be a recyclable cup, or that's going to be on my report.
You know what? We had a very pleasant conversation. We had a couple items that were, they're in a position where they know a lot more than we do, and seem to be willing to sort of meet it out occasionally. And so it can be tricky to know what we're supposed to know and what we're not supposed to know. And also at this point, things have been moving so fast and so quickly that occasionally there are sort of like timeline errors. And so we're just sort of straightening some of those out. Again, I want to give credit where credit's due. Our conversation was not confrontational. It was not unpleasant. But, that said, there are lots of questions to be asked.
Yeah, no, fair enough. I'll skip my back burner issue because we can talk about it next week, and we're going a little long here. Let's talk about who's hot in politics right now. And like a phoenix from the ashes hath risen Jody Raybould Wilson.
Man, I mean, that's the talk of the country right now. I mean, we won't give the. I presume if you're listening this deep into a political hot stove, you're at least somewhat familiar with what's happened. But the very short version is there are allegations that officials from the Prime Minister's office asked her to stop prosecution of SNC-Lavalin, the giant construction firm based in Montreal.
No, sorry, Maclean, you've got confused. That happens only in America.
That's true.
For the president's friends, that doesn't happen in Canada.
Now, the former Attorney General had recently been demoted to Veterans Affairs, which, yes, while still in cabinet, make no mistake, is a demotion. I mean, let's be honest. There had been rumblings and whispers that she had not performed up to snuff in her role as the Attorney General. For example, the new impaired driving law appears to be pretty blatantly unconstitutional. And there are sort of a number of things like that. And so if she had been demoted for performance reasons, that's entirely legitimate. That's not to suggest that these allegations aren't true. But what has happened now is that she has become sort of a symbol of rugged independence and standing up to the man. She's become not just a First Nations and feminist icon, both of which she was deservedly beforehand. But she's gone from sort of becoming maybe slightly disappointing cabinet minister to one of the most important people in the country.
Yeah, and she's sure not bailing them out.
No.
She's hiding behind solicitor-client privilege as a reason why she can't comment on these allegations. But here's the thing. If nothing had happened, she could easily come out and say nothing happened, and that would kill it. But she keeps going back to solicitor-client privilege. Now, of course, Maclean, in solicitor-client privilege, the client can authorize you to speak as the solicitor. So
Indeed,
if the client is the government of Canada, Justin Trudeau could say, no, go tell the truth about what happened. And she could come out and explain exactly what happened and put all of our fears to rest. But that is not apparently in the cards at this point.
You know what? If I had to guess what happened, and I don't know, but if I had to guess, I would suggest that a conversation did happen with her and key members of the Prime Minister's office, and they did not technically direct her, Minister, go do this. They probably said something to the effect of, is this outcome possible? Right. If I wanted this to happen, what would need to happen? I mean, legitimate, actual questions, which she may or may not have taken as a, hint.
Hey, just so you're aware, if this if SNC-Lavalin is not allowed to bid for 10 years of projects, you're talking about X number of Quebecois out of work. You're talking about these projects collapsing. Wouldn't that be an awful thing?
Yeah. Now I'm not telling you to do this, but let's just walk through what would happen if you don't. Yeah. That kind of thing.
Yeah, we just need different scenarios for whatever happens here.
Yeah, but no transcript of this meeting, because I'm sure it was not recorded, will ever emerge. But if it was to, I'm sure the transcript would not look that bad. I'm sure it would look like questions being asked, but without knowing the tone or indeed sort of the relationship between whichever PMO official and the minister there was, it's difficult to say whether it amounted to direction or, as we say, questions.
Yeah, no, exactly. So my politician who's heating up right now ties into that. It's Andrew Scheer, the Conservative Party leader, who basically somehow battled Trudeau into a margin of error tie in all the polling, despite the fact that the NDP are at historic lows. And now he's, wakes up one morning, picks up the Globe and Mail off of his front stoop, and oh my God, what is this? It is a gift from heaven. And to Scheer's credit, I remember driving in yesterday. I read the story. I was driving into work, and I was thinking, this is where you really miss Tom Mulcair, because Mulcair in question period could just dissect people. Like think of the work he did on the Nigel Wright scandal, which is kind of embarrassing now for the Conservatives that the biggest scandal they had was a guy trying to pay back taxpayers. Whereas here we have
Mulcair, you're right. Mulcair was just uniquely effective in that kind of role.
Exactly, and I thought it's a shame because Jagmeet Singh's out here in Burnaby, and it doesn't even have a seat in the House. And the NDP have no one there, and I'm not sure. Scheer feels like a nice prairie kid with the dimples and all of that. But I gotta say, his performance in question period yesterday was excellent. He was prosecutorial, whatever the word is. He was measured. He didn't light his hair on fire, but he was very.
Yeah, he didn't overplay his hand.
Exactly, And I think he's aware. Like, look, this is every good reporter in the country is digging into this story now. They're going to find stuff. He doesn't have to force anything, and he certainly doesn't have to force Canadians to think on make up their minds on day one about what exactly happened. But he made the case, and he's going. If that continues, I think people will see Andrew Scheer in a whole different light than the nice farm kid with the dimples.
And with an election just around the corner, I mean, you might argue this could not be happening at depending on your perspective, either a better or worse time.
Yes, precisely. So, yeah, it'll be interesting to see. By the way, do you see Terry Lakes ramping up for a federal Liberal run in Kamloops?
I did. It's difficult to separate personal. I quite like Dr. Lake. I like Terry a lot, and so I always will wish him well. And I had a lot of respect for a lot of the work he did here in the legislature. To be perfectly honest, I'm surprised. I thought he was kind of done with politics, but whatever he does, I wish him well.
Yes, he and I had a little back and forth on Twitter this week because I find the Trudeau deficit spending obnoxious and short-sighted. And Dr. Lake,
I did not see this. I did not see this
pushed back a little bit against me, and then the great thing is he said, unemployment at a historic 40-year low is a good thing to run on. And I pointed out that you're absolutely right. I mean, who could forget how pivotal that was in 2017 and how we're now enjoying the second term of the Christy Clark majority government? To which he kind of threw Mike DeYoung under the bus slightly, if we had spent that $2.7 billion on stuff, we would have been okay.
Well, I mean, if he's running for the federal Liberals, he's obviously from the red side of the coalition and probably did have that opinion sincerely. And he
so is DeYoung though. DeYoung could run in Abbotsford.
It's true. That's true. But DeYoung wanted to keep the purse strings tight. For whatever reason, and I'm not saying it was bad or good, but that is what happened.
It was interesting. All right, cooling down. I'll do mine really quick, and then we'll finish off with yours. I think we are in the final sad days of Claire Trevina's reign as Transportation Minister. I think she should enjoy this session because I think after it there will be a summertime shuffle, and I think Claire Trevina will pass into the mist. She's an up-island female MLA. We've just got one elected in Nanaimo who has political experience federally, and I think stepped out of a pretty safe federal gig to run for John Horgan. I'm not saying there's any quid pro quo, but I do think he perceives her as a certain star in their caucus. I think Malcolmson's going to slide in. I think there's not room for her and Claire Trevina in that caucus. So. All that to say, I think her days are numbered as Transportation Minister. And let me say, we've had some excellent Transportation Ministers in this province. Flying Phil Ghilardi, Kevin Flying Falcon. We've had some brutal ones. No offense, Todd Stone. It was not a good run for you in transportation. Claire Trevina, though, may be the worst of all time. There you go. The opposite of Tom Brady, the worst of all time.
Well, I mean, the Massey file alone, I think, is going to be a millstone on, not just that government, and especially in places like Delta and Surrey, but unfortunately on her career. Yeah,
145 studies have been done on the Massey Tunnel, but she needs 146 and a 147th before she'll act. It's mind-boggling. Just make the decision. Just say no. If you're going to say no, just say no, and at least take the heat for that. And okay, you'll lose a riding here or there, but at least you've done what's the thing. But
taking a bold, decisive step. Yeah.
And then her union only hiring and trying to hide that from the public, and then it gets dug out by the media, and the fact that that's going to inflate costs by at least 7% of Patello Bridge, which by the way is about $100 million or more, which is a nice chunk of change that would have been helpful on building Massey. Not a great run for Claire Trevina. We haven't talked about rideshare, which
the less said the better on that file.
How these NDPers, for such a diverse, young, hip caucus, as we're being told by Rob Shaw that they are from time to time, they're sure to touch on this one. It doesn't make any sense at all.
Well, if you're right, Minister Malcolmson will have a busy workload.
And I don't believe Malcolmson will be the next Minister of Transportation. I believe it will be Bowen Ma. So there you go, take it. To which,
that's a good prediction.
If she starts embracing the same policies as Claire Trevina, I will quickly refer to her as Bowen Meh, but we will wait and see how that all pans out. All right, wrap us up. Who's your cold politician?
Well, it's not been. You were talking about periods of time that have not been good to cabinet ministers. There was no cabinet minister's star burned brighter at this time last year than David Eby. And not for nothing did they call him the Dauphin, the leader in waiting.
The crusading Attorney General. Yep.
Yes, the one who took down Christy Clark.
Like Harvey did. He was going to save us all.
He was seen by many as future premier, and some even said future prime ministerial material. He does kind of look like Gregor Robertson, but the similarities end there. But look, the proportional representation referendum is squarely on him. It was a terrible process, and I think the worst part of that is it's the PR advocates who are now the first to say that, because it can't be PR. Of course, the benefits of that are obvious. So it must be the terrible botched process, and they're not wrong about the process. The process was terrible, and the NDP, if you talk to them, the premier, the finance minister, and senior staff, that's all David Eby. I mean, yes, they had to sign off on it, but the decision to go with 3 different systems, David Eby. All these kinds of things he's going to have to wear it, and he is wearing it. And then even on the files that he had gotten some good attention on, most notably the German report and money laundering in casinos, there's a Von Palmer column this morning basically saying, you know what, Attorney General, it's been 18 months. You can stop threatening to do an inquiry. Just do it or don't at this point. And I agree. I mean, at a certain point, the honeymoon has to be over. At a certain point, you are the incumbent government. And, almost 2 years deep now, I think we're well past that point. And he has cried wolf on an inquiry a few too many times. And at a certain point, you have to, I know this is a family show, but eventually you have to shit or get off the pot.
Yikes, there goes our clean rating. No, you're exactly right. And look, I think I've said this before on this show. I doubt he'll call an inquiry, because once you call an inquiry, it's out of your control what information gets out. And bluntly, there are good reporters out there, and Sam Cooper's done a great job on this file. But, a number of these reporters are relying on leaks from David Eby or tips from David Eby and his apparatus. And they always come out at the same time when the BC Liberals have a little bit of momentum. David Eby reaches back into the bag of tricks and finds a report or finds something that he hands out on this. And if he hands it over to an inquiry, he doesn't have that option anymore. It's out of his control. And guess what? They're going to blame the bureaucrats and the criminals a hell of a lot more than they're going to blame former BC Liberal cabinet ministers.
I think that's exactly right. I think they enjoy holding it in reserve, kind of like liquor announcements by a previous government, to define the narrative of the day. And in a public inquiry, it's all out of his hands. And more to the point, he wouldn't get the credit for it, even if it did find terrible things.
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah, that is a good point. So yes, David Eby, he's given us all the EBGBs. And look, ICBC, he's been in command of this thing for a year and a half now. This first year of his mandate, he's lost as much money as the evil BC Liberals did. So, yes, there are changes coming, but they're not going to be popular ones once the public starts to get a whiff of their bills. So,
and as you saw on the Orca, an overwhelming majority of British Columbians want change and choice in auto insurance, including, I think it was 80% of NDP voters. And yet,
yeah, here we are. You want to know what else an overwhelming majority of British Columbians want? Mike Riley is quarterback of the BC Lions.
You know what? I tend to agree with you. I think that'd be a fantastic choice. I think he wants to come back to Vancouver.
He's going to come to BC. He's going to spend the rest of his career kicking Bo Levi Mitchell's ass all over.
No, not that part. But one could certainly not blame him for wanting to join an exciting coach in Devon Playbrooks. But also, I mean, come on, playing indoors in BC Place in October and November as opposed to the barren Arctic hellscape that is Edmonton.
Exactly.
I'm from Calgary. I'm allowed to say that.
His best friend Travis Lulay backing him up.
Yep.
They're friends. Their families are close. The kids are the same age. It just all kind of works out. So we are hopeful here in BC Lions land.
I'm a Stampeders fan, but I would come over more often to watch Mike Riley play. The man is legitimately an exciting guy to watch play. Yeah. He's a great quarterback. I hope he does come here.
You think physically he can hold up for another 3 years?
Oh yeah, I do. I think he's in better shape than he let on. He'll probably play a little safer style, but that's fine. I mean, you referenced Bo Levi Mitchell, the other guy who's sort of neck and neck with him to be the best quarterback in the league. Bo doesn't run a lot.
No.
Mike Riley doesn't have to either. He's got a cannon for an arm and he's smart.
Yeah, no, absolutely. All right, well, there you go, folks. A little BC Lions CFL talk for you.
Can't help ourselves. Can't help ourselves.
We should actually get someone to write on the CFL players agreement for us. That would be interesting to.
Oh, we could probably get a player. Let's do it.
Oh, we'd be like the Players Tribune, but for CFL players.
Yes. Oh,
they all
done.
tweet you. All those Stampeders tweet you all the time. You don't talk to them.
They do.
By the way,
we got to get a lion. We got to get a lion.
By the way, my favorite tweet of the week came from, this name may not mean anything to you. Do you know the name Rona Raskin?
I do.
Yeah, so in the 90s, she had a radio show on Z95 that all of the naughty teenagers of the time would listen to called Sex Lies and Audio Tape, and you could call in with your relationship problems. But Dr. Rona Raskin, God bless her, taking our side on project labor agreements, retweeting something that I tweeted out from the Orca, and then making her own case for fairness in government procurement. So there you go, NDP. Rona Raskin's on board. You've lost her.
Wow. Sex, lies, and project labor agreements.
There's nothing sexier than government procurement. All right, at the Orca BC on Twitter, facebook.com/theorcabc. If you want to skip to our YouTube channel, bit.ly/theorcatv. And he's Maclean K, at Maclean K. I'm Jordan Bateman, at Jordan Bateman. Yeah. Anything else, Maclean? Have a great week.
No, have a great weekend.
Is it
Happy
snowing?
politics.
Is it snowing over there? Are you going to be okay?
It is. It was snowing this morning. I'm in the
my
bowels
God.
of the press gallery, so I can't actually see outside, but I walked through flurries on my way to work.
Okay, just walk.
Victoria is grinding to a halt.
Walk on the bike lanes. They'll clear those first. All right. Take care, everyone. We'll talk to you next week.